I'm going to be moderating a little bit of a panel here with myself, and you just heard the great Ann Coulter. She's got more bestsellers than Stephen King, I think, at this point. And then, of course, we've also got Brandon Darby. He's the man you just saw doxing cartel leaders in Mexico. He, of course, is a threat to the cartels because he's working for Breitbart. He's the director of the Border and Cartel Chronicles project there, and he's naming and shaming these guys so the Mexican authorities can go after him. Brandon, wow, tell me a little bit about that project and how it came together.
Well, first off, thank you so much for coming and caring about this, because that is what's going to change everything. When more of you all care about what's happening in Mexico with cartels, when more of you care about what's happening on our border, it's going to change everything. So you being here is going to impact immigration. It's going to, you know, if we didn't do something about Mexican cartels, we wouldn't be able to do Remain in Mexico, right? If we didn't have places where cartels were being gone after. So when we looked at the border problems, we realized that some people covered the border on the north side and the US side, but not so much. And no one was really covering the border on the south side, right? So the entire border wasn't being covered. And we tried to figure out why. And what we realized was that no one was covering it on the south side because everyone who did got murdered. And so no one would cover it. And we said, well, wait a minute, we're like Breitbart. Like, we can't just, you know, we're supposed to be a voice for the voiceless. We're supposed to stand up for the little guy, for the citizen journalist. So what we did was we went there and we started finding people in the communities who wanted to speak out or who were speaking out under pseudonyms or on anonymous social media accounts. And we said, hey, wait a minute, you're risking your life to fight these cartels on the border, and 500 people see what you say on Twitter, right, on your anonymous account. Why don't you send that stuff to me? I'll pay you. And then we're going to publish it in English and Spanish, and we'll throw the whole weight of what Breitbart has politically behind it to make sure that Americans know what's happening here. And what we've seen is that since we started doing that roughly 7 or 8 years ago, people care now, and the more people who listen to this message and the more people who see what's happening, they care. Then the Republicans start to use it as talking points, and eventually we hope it translates into actual policy, which we're maybe starting to see. Like, we have a president talking about cartels, which is the biggest thing in the world.
Amazing. And from your perspective, when you're talking about immigration, legal, illegal, where do the cartels play in that? What kind of role do they play on the border?
Well, it was one of Trump's strongest points, I think, during the campaign. I mean, everything I said in Trump, we trust. I'd write it again. It was the most magnificent campaign ever. And I think what people in Washington, New York, LA, and San Francisco don't understand is how the country is being so slammed with drugs. Just ordinary, sweet little towns out in rural America. In fact, I think a lot of the people in LA, San Francisco, New York, and Washington are happy to know that Americans out in the middle of the country are dying off of overdoses. Well, if you've read, and I recommend it even though it isn't one of my books, Sam Quinones's Dreamland, you know that 90% of the drugs coming into the US comes from Mexico. It comes from the cartels. This is one of the reasons we wanted a wall. But I mean, I think that was huge to Donald Trump's victory in the New Hampshire primary, as I suspected it would be. Drugs, heroin are a huge problem in New Hampshire, and to have Donald Trump up there talking about it, and talking about it in a way where they know if there's no heroin, they won't have heroin addicts. We don't need, I'm not to slam them, but either Nancy Reagan or Melania Trump saying, don't do drugs. What we need is a wall so the drugs stop coming in.
And by the way, I don't know if anyone actually heard this. There actually was a little breaking news on, not necessarily a cartel, but earlier today, just saw the headline before we walked on stage here, Suffolk County, New York, just did a major bust. Over 100 MS-13 leaders in New York State just got rounded up and just got arrested.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, that's probably so Cuomo can give them driver's licenses.
Right. Yeah, what kind of, I mean, we could have a whole discussion about what that does for our voting patterns if now you can give driver's licenses, which in most states aren't even necessary to vote, but now if illegal immigrants are going those, what does that do to our politics?
Luckily, I don't think Trump was going to take California or New York anyway.
Right. So from Brandon, from that perspective, you're looking at the cartels on the southern side. We've obviously seen the impact of MS-13 and the other cartels on the northern side. But what are some of the things that President Trump could do, or just the government writ large, in order to increase those efforts at actually stamping them out at the root of where they're coming from?
Well, that's a good question. You know, right now in the border security circles, right, there's a big debate going on. And so folks like myself want to see certain factions of certain cartels designated as foreign terror organizations. Other folks are fighting against that, saying that's not a good idea. Other folks are thinking all cartels should be foreign terror organizations, which that's not going to happen, and it would be devastating if it did happen. So policy-wise, that's really where the argument is right now, is how hard to go after the cartels. You know, a lot of people, especially in the administration, who, how do I say this nicely? The swamp, right? When we talk about the swamp, when we talk about the State Department, they have a way of doing things, and they don't want those ways to change, right? So when we're looking at Mexico, when we're looking at what's happening on our border, obviously what the State Department is doing in Mexico is failing. We're giving them billions of dollars to fight cartels. It's not happening. You know, they're getting stronger. When I first started covering the border, there were maybe 2 or 3 regions of 32 states in Mexico that were under the direct control of cartels. Now there's 16 to 17 that are under the direct control, you know? So changing policy and going after the cartels, possibly making a point out of 1 or 2 small factions and declaring them as foreign terror organizations, I think that's where things need to go.
Well, so, and this is, and I remember the other side of that debate, where a lot of people were questioning it. I say this as a former military intelligence officer, is that, you know, we saw when they went after El Chapo's son recently, the entire cartels fought back and defeated the Mexican government and got the son to be released. And so if you've got US government declaring them terrorist organizations, is that going to lead to blowback from some guys who are obviously very powerful and have a lot of firepower on their side?
Well, okay, so first off, that would be the Sinaloa cartel, right? I wouldn't advocate, I don't think they've crossed the line into foreign terror orgs by the letter of the law. I do think that one faction of Los Zetas and another faction of the Gulf Cartel, not even the entire Gulf Cartel, I think they have crossed that line because of their political involvement, right? So I wouldn't suggest that the Sinaloa cartel be designated as a foreign terror org at this time. I think if we went after 2 small factions that have a lot less influence on domestic politics across nationally in Mexico, I think that it would basically make an example of them, and it would cause the others to tone it down and to fall in line, you know? So that's what I advocate for. When it comes to the thing with the Sinaloa cartel and El Chapo's son, guys, don't be tricked. This is what Mexico does all the time, and the US State Department does this all the time. They're like, look, we caught this cartel boss. The cartel boss is part of the problem, but the cartel boss is not the problem. There's a cartel boss, okay? And then around that cartel boss, there's this circle of power, right? There's politicians, bankers, financiers, lawyers, diplomats. Those are the real problem. They're very happy if you take El Chapo. They don't care. They just replace that part of the pie. They don't care. It's the circle. And so if we can't go after the circle, if we can't go after the people who launder the money, who give them money, who work with them and meet with them and give them material support, we're never going to actually address the problem. And if we don't actually address that problem, we're never going to do anything about the immigration problem that we have in this country, and we're going to lose our country. Right? So if we want to stop that, yes, we need to change policies here. We need to change magnets. Yes, we need to build a wall. Yes, we need to do all of these things, but all of those things are treatments for an underlying problem, and that underlying problem is a nation that is led by paramilitary cartels south of our border. If people from El Salvador wanted to come north to work and Mexico had jobs, they would just stay in Mexico, which would be fine with me, right? Stay there. that's the kind of thing we have to start looking at. Not only addressing what Ann is talking about, but also looking at the systemic root of it. And you said something in your talk. You said, why can't we help them there? Yes, that is the thing. That is what we need to do, because these people in their minds, like Democrats, a lot of them think that they're helping other places in the world by allowing everyone to come here, but they're not helping them. They're actually hurting those places, and they're hurting us in the process.
And how ridiculous is it that we'll do these nation-building projects in Afghanistan, Botswana, and Burundi, and all these places where the one that you could at least make an argument that there's a direct benefit to American citizens is just south of our border.
It's like you're reading my mind. Whenever I see Brandon's articles, I want to tweet them out and say, this is 2 miles from where Americans live. This is, 20 miles from where Americans live. Not 7,000 changing flights. It's a nightmare. You have to stop in Damascus and, to get to Syria or Afghanistan. Absolutely no threat to us. And it's not just obviously it's our State Department, our government, our Defense Department, who for some reason want Americans to just keep dying in Afghanistan for no benefit whatsoever. But why isn't the media talking about it? Other than Brandon Darby at Breitbart, it's very, very strange that this is happening right on our border. It's as if you have, ISIS and Al-Qaeda together doing their beheadings and mass murders. And it's cheek by jowl with us with no border in between, but no. Tell me what's going on in China. Tell me what's going on in East Timor. With or Afghanistan. No, of course this influences us both. Why can't we bring the military back and send them to Mexico?
When I was in the military, actually in Special Forces, those guys would talk about that. And I think there was this general sense of, why are we fighting these fights between tribal powers that have been at war for hundreds of years?
It's almost like it's rude to fight a war or deploy military force if it benefits your own country. Oh, that's so selfish of you. You should be having Americans die where it's no benefit to your own country. No, I don't think that's the way most Americans think.
So Brandon, what are some of the ways, though, that organizations in America are either complicit or engaging with these cartels? What are some of the ways that we can target that on the north side of the border to cut off the other end of the funnel?
Well, I think the big thing is sharing the stories, reading about it, educating yourself. You come to Breitbart and look at what we're writing. We really don't engage in the politics of it all as much as far as the border and cartel team. We just write what's happening there, When we look at U.S. organizations, there's such a deeper conversation to be had, right? The vast majority of the people who come to our country illegally or migrate irregularly, whatever terms people listening want to use, and I'm assuming illegally, you'll notice that it happens in the territory of certain cartels and not others. That's because those cartels have shifted their business model where they're making as much or more from illegal immigration and from asylum claims as they're making from drugs, right? So when you're a U.S. church, or when you're at Catholic Charities, or when you're the Baptist Church, and you're literally making millions of dollars, right, taking in millions of dollars of funds to help all the people coming, what you're actually doing is you're a cog in that system that the cartel is benefiting from. So your effort to help them is actually fueling the very systems that are the problem in the first place. So a lot of our religious institutions are heavily engaged in financial benefit from behaviors that benefit cartels. We have banks. We've had a number of U.S. banks get in trouble for laundering cartel money, having cartel money, investing cartel money, and no one got in trouble really for that. This is a situation that we're in. When we look at politicians along the border, most of them are Democrats, and they have very good relationships with Mexico's dominant political party, the PRI. There's a problem there because the PRI is controlled by drug cartels. So if we don't do something, right? Like, that's what I was getting at earlier. whether we're talking about designating them as terrorist organizations, and Seb Gorka disagreed with me, right? I love Seb, but Seb and I had this talk last night, and then we stopped and we said, wait a minute, how cool is it that we're all talking about what to do about drug cartels,
right?
You know, Mexican cartels. So something has to be done that goes after the banks and that stops certain very prominent and powerful organizations from being in that funding tree. There's something that's going to have to be
Father,
done.
can I throw this out? Because there's the one that a lot of people don't even know, and we've covered this at One America, I've covered it, that the bank you're talking about, the main one, was HSBC.
Right.
Right, and so HSBC was found to have been laundering money for the drug cartels, for Hezbollah, another great organization. You know, Media Matters will put that out and say, Jack Posobiec calls the Hezbollah a great organization.
Right.
And what did they do? So they all went to jail for helping the cartels, right? They all went, you know, people got arrested. No, they didn't go to jail. You know what they did? They had a sweetheart deal from the US government. They had to pay a little fine. And do you know who they brought in to clean everything up? James Comey. The same James Comey who went on to be the FBI director. After he'd been in the Bush administration, he came in, cleaned up HSBC, and he cleaned up a lot on that deal to the tune of millions of dollars for coming in and doing all that. And then they made all the problems just kind of go away. And there's really not really been any indication of whether or not HSBC is continuing these these operations, just doing it in a way that the U.S. Treasury hasn't been able to figure out yet. So, Ann, and there was something that Brandy mentioned that I wanted to get to, where I think you kind of met together, because you were just talking about how the politicians on the border tend to be connected to these Mexican parties, in many cases have ties. And then, Ann, you were also talking about how immigration is now shifting the voting demographics in these areas, to especially in the border areas. I mean, you could see it on the map, right? If you look at Texas, it's all of the border counties are now voting blue. So what is going on with that dynamic?
Well, it's very depressing. But like I say, if you don't believe me, run for office in California. See how you do with these great ideas we're pushing. You'll lose. We're losing everything. And I don't understand why the rest of the country can't notice what's happening. It drove me crazy when I was campaigning, I don't know, I guess for Trump in Wisconsin. Remember, Wisconsin was very reluctant to get on the Trump train. Well, you go out to Wisconsin, it's like 1950s America. They still had blockbusters. They still had blockbusters. And I just thought, well, you can't call your cousins in Minnesota and ask how that Somali immigration is working out for them. Americans just, I guess they're just so beaten down by accusations of racism, they refuse to consider what it means for the fate of the Republican Party. Forget the country and the culture. To have such huge masses of immigrants coming in from such different cultures, and yeah, okay, we can assimilate everyone or anyone. We're a great country, love to have you here. But when you're bringing in this many at once, there isn't assimilation. What you're creating is, little Somaliaville. Up in Dearborn, Michigan, I went by to see it a couple of years ago. There's street signs in Arabic. Well, that isn't coming to America and assimilating. That isn't great. I'm happy to be an American. That's creating little outposts of cultures that I don't think any of you would want to live in. I don't think any Americans would want to live in. But yeah, I mean, just for separately from culture, just saving the country so that we ever get another Republican president. The Democrats have been salivating over Texas for 20 years now. Who knows? Hopefully it's not in 2020. But if not, 2024, it's coming soon. Florida, Georgia, we've already lost Virginia, we've lost Nevada. I mean, just as a Republican, you ought to be really worried about this.
I'll ask this question of both of you. What policy would you like to see coming forward that would help, for you on cartels, and then for Ann on immigration?
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so just simply with cartels, I want to see the U.S. government go after them more aggressively. I want to see the U.S. government begin to treat Mexico and Mexico's cartel-connected politicians as cartel-connected politicians. I think that we need to stop treating Mexico like they're Western Europe or like they're Great Britain or like they're Norway, and we need to start treating Mexico like the failing narco state that it is.
So Afghanistan. And
I have two, I'll try to make it quick since apparently you want to go to lunch. Two optimistic points. One is, unlike you, I watched the Democratic debate last night, and I promise you they are doing everything they can to lose this. I did not realize until last night Pete Buttigieg wants to give, I'm not making this up, this isn't an Ann Coulter hyperbole, wants to give reparations to the children of illegal aliens. Okay, just maybe that wasn't an optimistic point. Optimistic point number two, and then I will end. If we've lost the country, my optimistic point is that, wow, were the Democrats attacking billionaires last night. It really kind of perked me up. And I thought, well, if we lose our country, at least the billionaires will be destroyed. And since they wrecked our country, they deserve it.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking your time today to be here. Ann Coulter, Brandon Darby, and I'm Jack Posobiec. Thank you so much.